Hello and welcome back to Prism and Company. My name is Colin and I have an exciting thing that has led to a strange conundrum. The exciting thing, my husband is moving officially from Canada to the United States, and we've recently had an influx of all his stuff. I took a whirlwind trip to Canada and picked it all up and brought it back, so my living room is full of boxes. It is so exciting and so cool. And within those boxes is a juicy, awesome collection of tarot decks, and it's so cool. Our collection now has more than doubled. It's sweet. So more juicy videos to come because I have a much wider pool to pick from now. But it's given me the opportunity to take a really hard look at my collection and say, what's good enough to stay? Does anything need to go? I don't feel obligated to get rid of anything, but this is the perfect time with us merging collections and finding space for everything for me to say, do I really want all these decks? I've got a whole bunch, and as is, it's hard to get through everything. So why not take this opportunity to really filter down to just the best of the best and keep them? And I realized as I was doing this that I didn't have a great way to look at a deck. I didn't have a great way to sit down and analyze it and say, this deck is a keeper or this deck's a call. And so I've decided to make the Prism&Co's Guide to a Fantastic Tarot Deck. Anyway, I took the very fun, intuitive, easy breezy process of looking at things you enjoy and deciding what makes you happy and what do you like. And I decided to make a spreadsheet out of it because I love spreadsheets and spreadsheets make me happy. So that's what we're going to do today. So trigger warning, this video contains spreadsheets. Boom. Which I love. I think it's going to be great, but honestly, not very much. We're using spreadsheets as a tool to kind of break down what a deck is to me, what's important, how much importance do I put on it. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Cue the intro. The deck that really made me want to do this was this guy right here, the Tarot of the Drowning World. And if you haven't seen this deck before, it's really, really cool. It's quite unique. Let me pull up a couple of cards here just to give you a taste of what we'll be looking at. This is a photographic deck, and all of these were shot from above in this pond, or I think it was a couple of ponds, in several locations with plants and animals and objects and all these things on it. It's pretty darn cool. It's very, very unique. And quite frankly, it's hard to read. And plant symbolism doesn't mean a whole lot to me. And some of the images are kind of repetitive. But it is so cool and so unique and so out of the box that it feels like it fits my aesthetic just right. It is this perfect liminal nexus of I don't know what to do with this thing. Do I keep it? Do I cull it? Does it deserve to stick around? And this is ground zero for why I started to do this project. And I thought it would be fun to talk through, how do I look at a deck and determine, is it good enough to keep? Now, I don't always use spreadsheets to decide if I want to keep decks or not. I wanted to do it in this case because I'm doing it en masse. I wanted to take a look at my whole collection, compare it side by side, and see, how do they all stack up? Are there some that are far and away the winners? Is there a whole group of them, or maybe one or two that are on the bottom? And not that I'm going to base my entire decision off that, but I think those are good data points to see. I think sometimes I look over at my, collection of tarot cards and I see decks that I really like, and some of them are better than others, but I'm like, in the right light, if you set the scene and light a candle and put a little berry white, I can get down with any tarot deck, But that's not true. Some of them really bother me, and some of them I've just grown not to like anymore. I got to give a huge shout out to Lisa Papez, because her channel has taught me a lot about how to really buckle down and look at a tarot collection in a very critical way. And I think she does an awesome job at it. If you've never seen her channel before, it's very good. I will try and link a video down below of one that I really like that kind of exemplifies her system? Her mindset? All the above for keeping or calling tarot decks. So you ask, where do we start? For me, I'm going to be picking 4 different categories that really speak to me within tarot decks. Things that I find really important. Categories that are unique from one another and are things that I think about all the time. When I get a new deck, when I'm thinking about keeping or getting rid of a deck, when I'm reaching for one, what are things that I want that deck to be consistently over and over and over again? Now, me and the husband have been doing this with our own collections, and it has become immediately apparent to me that this list is not the same for everybody. My initial thought was like, I'll make this great list, and then people can use it to judge their own collections. The things that are important to me in a tarot deck might not be important to you at all. So if this is a cool idea to you, I encourage you to sit down and think, even just think critically about like, what do I really like in a tarot deck? What are some of the categories or ideas or ways that it's executed that really do it for me? So let's take a look at a few decks and I'll go through all these ideas one by one and tell you how we're building the spreadsheet. Speaking of the spreadsheet, there it is. This is the template that we'll be using to plug all this information into. We have spots for 4 different categories and then a couple of little checkboxes down here that we'll talk about soon. All right, so category 1, consistency. Specifically, consistency of execution. Now, what do I mean by that? As an example, I will be using the lovely Joe Sparrow Tarot. What a cool deck. Let me grab a couple cards and we'll talk consistency. When I say consistency of execution, I mean from card to card, am I getting the same thing or am I getting something different? Now, that doesn't always have to mean that the style is the same or the images are the same. There can be a lot of variety while still being consistent. This deck, I think, really exemplifies a very consistent style across the entire deck. There is the exact same line weight or thickness of line used in the entire deck. The color palette is pretty consistent throughout the entire thing. His groovy cartoon style is consistent. So this deck, no matter what card you draw, whether you love it or you hate it, you're gonna get the same product every single time. This is a perfectly consistent deck in my book. And honestly, this is one of the most important things to me in a tarot deck is consistency. If it was all of this rad artwork and these beautiful lines and then one card, like this moon, had a super thick border on it or something, it would drive me nuts. This deck has set down some rules. The artist has said, this is what I'm making and this is the style that I'm using. And if that artist decides to break the rules in a way that is not really meaningful, it just feels lazy to me. There's lots of decks that do this. I don't have a ton of them because I've gotten rid of them, quite frankly, along the way. But this is an example of a deck that is just beautifully consistent. Let's take a look at another deck that is consistent in a very, very different way. From the Hubby collection, we have the Slow Holler Tarot. I think this deck is totally gorgeous, super beautiful, and it's, I would also say, perfectly consistent, but in such a different way. Well, maybe not perfectly consistent, but it's so close. This is a collaborative deck. So every card is done by a different artist, I think, at least by a whole bunch of different artists. So you're getting this huge range in style, in medium, in application of texture and paint and all these different things. However, the deck creator or the curator or however it went down decided to only use a few colors for the whole deck. We have this gold tone in, various shades. We have this kind of blood red, white, and black. And I think there are, grays in there as well. And every card has some combination of these colors. And that lends this beautiful consistency to this very inconsistent deck. But because the whole premise of the deck is that it's collaborative, that's also consistent. If there was 2 cards that looked really similar to me, that would be almost more inconsistent in this case. I want each one to feel like its own artist, its own thing. I want it to feel unique and weird, but I also want it to feel like it's of a piece, which for me is these colors holding the whole thing together. So this is like the opposite ends of the spectrum of consistency. The Joe Sparrow with super, consistent visual consistency. Wow, I said consistency a lot there. And the Slow Holler being kind of conceptually consistent. And both of those are very strong in different ways. So if we take a look here at our spreadsheet, let's plug in consistency of execution. And with that, we get to choose the weight. Now the weight will be multiplied by our star rating. So each category is going to have a star rating of 0 to 5, with of course 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. And the weight will decide how many points is awarded. So for example, I'm going to put a 1 with the weight next to consistency of execution. So 1 star equals 1 point. If we instead did a 0.5 weight, let's say, everything would be cut in half. 2 stars would only be worth 1 point. 4 stars would only be worth 2 points. So we'll keep these two columns in mind because not every part of a deck is as important to me, and I think that should be reflected in our final scoring. Moving along to category 2, we have exciting or varied images, and it's kind of exciting and varied images. And I have 2 different decks to show you that highlight this on, again, kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. We're starting off with the Elle Tarot. Now, this is not the box for the Elle Tarot. I actually threw away my box back in the before times when I didn't keep my boxes. Also, this box is huge if you've ever seen it. So I decided to just make my own. Got some kind of rainbow cards going around the edge here for the Elle. And this actually gives you a good idea of what I'm talking about. Every card in this deck is a feast for the eyes. It is beautifully vibrant. It is varied. Every single card feels like this little taste of an esoteric dream world that you get to step into. I would say the consistency of this deck is very low. Marie White drew this or painted this over, I think it was like 10 years or something. So her style changed immensely from the first card, the Emperor, to the last card, whichever one was the last one. But even the way that she draws bodies is so different in different cards. Like, look at that versus that. That looks like 2 different artists to me. The consistency is so low, but each card is so exciting to behold. It's so curious. It's so interesting. The details are there. This is a deck full of exciting and varied images. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Ibis Tarot. This is a really cool little deck, and this, I would say, has very exciting and varied images. But let's look for some of the minor arcana here. I'm going to scoot ahead a little bit. Here we go. The minor arcana are all pips over landscapes with sky. And those, give me some minors. Here we go. They all kind of have the same flow to them. And you're not going to get a ton of variety in that it's all just these skyscapes with pips floating over the top of them. But every sky is intentional and every cloud formation feels different and unique. The small little details you get on the ground are varied and interesting. There's hieroglyphics that are sprinkled over the cards. The arrangement of the pips feels very different. And quite frankly, I'm super excited. Oh, that's not a minor. I'm super excited to look at the deck every time. I don't get bored flipping through the minor arcana, which is so important to me in a deck. I love, love, love the minors. And this delivers on the opposite end of the spectrum, which I think is pretty cool. So let's plug this into our spreadsheet. We already have consistency of execution. We are adding exciting, varied images. Now, this isn't as important to me. I think having exciting and varied images is, now that I think about this, it's kind of as important to me. This is the beauty of this. This whole thing, because it's a spreadsheet, we can change it later. As of right now, consistency is king for me. That is the one that I need a deck to be consistent in some way, or else it just rubs me the wrong way. I can deal with some images that are a little less exciting along the way, as long as they fit in the pack. So 1 is our most consistent, 0 is the least consistent. I'm going to rate this high still. I'm going to say 0.8. But we still have 2 categories to go. Let's keep this train chugging along. The third category, uniqueness of system. Now, what I mean by that, I don't want every deck in my collection to be a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. I don't want every deck to be a Thoth-inspired deck or a Marseille-inspired deck. In fact, in a perfect world, I would want every deck that I pick up to be a completely unique system. Now, there are some caveats with that. I want it to still be a tarot deck in some ways, or an oracle deck, that's fine too. But if it's a tarot deck, I want it to feel like a tarot deck, but also feel like its own unique thing. And a lot of times what I mean within that space is I don't want it to be ultra visually reminiscent of another deck. And if there's different varied meanings within that, even better. So let me show you two ends of the spectrum here of what could constitute a unique system in the collection. First up is the breathtaking Marguerite Peterson Tarot. This might be my favorite tarot deck that I own. I keep coming back to it as like, it's constantly in my top 5, top 3, maybe top 2. I don't know, something about this deck just speaks to me. I think it's so cool. And this one is definitely unique. Is that a hair there? There we go. Definitely unique because it does its own thing. It can go its own way, Fleetwood Mac style. And it does not care that it's not a, quote unquote, normal tarot deck. It is just going to go off on its own and be what it wants to be and be absolutely beautiful along the way. Now, it still has all the normal names of tarot cards on there. There are recognizable major arcana. There are visual themes that you could see in other decks. So it's not like it's an oracle deck. It's not going so far off the rails that you can't get tarot out of it, but it is definitely doing its own thing. I'm just going to lay out some more cards because it is so beautiful. This is one end of the spectrum. Let's take a look at the other. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the Thoth. This is a formative system of a deck. This is a deck that other decks are based off of. It's like the RWS in some ways. And quite frankly, that's a system. In fact, it is so much a system it defines other systems. I would put RWS in this category. Obviously Thoth. I would put Marseille in this category. I'd put a playing card deck in this category. Anything that feels like its own unique system is great. And then every deck after this that feels kind of Thothy is going to get docked some points because I've already got a Thoth in my collection. Every deck that's a little bit Marseille gets docked. It doesn't immediately exclude it, but it does stain it just a touch from being a completely unique thing. All right, back to the spreadsheet for a moment. We're going to plug in uniqueness of system. And this one to me, it's important, but it's not a deal breaker. So I'm going to put this at a 0.6, a little bit more than half for its weight. Last but not least, in our named categories, we have meaningful symbolism. Now, this is an important one to me, yes, but again, not a deal breaker because you could hand me a deck of cards with 4 of Cups written on it, and that's it. And you could still read that as a tarot deck. It's not exciting, but meaningful symbolism adds excitement and variety to a reading. My first one for this is going to be the Anima Mundi. Ooh, that's a shiny box, which getting all sorts of weird reflections on it. Anima Mundi, if you're not familiar, is a lovely animal-based tarot deck, and it's chock-a-block full of symbolism. We have these penguins looking at, is that a dead penguin? Oh, that's kind of sad. But it's sad. It's 5 of Cups. That's sad. We have a hermit crab in its shell for the 4 of Cups. It's kind of hunkering down. We have a moth. There we go. Moth with the lambscat. We have the tools on the magician. There's stuff in here. You can point to actual symbols, and those symbols can be meaningful in a reading. The 10 of Cups, we have a swarm of fish. What a school of fish? A conglomeration of aquatic swimmers. I don't know what that means in this exact moment, but that's meaningful symbolism that you could pull on in a reading and actually get something out of it. We're going to spread out a few cards because why not? It's so lovely. This is another deck that I really come back to time and time again. Is this like one of my favorite tarot decks? And this one always surprises me because I don't super love animal decks, but I love this one for whatever reason. I think it's so freaking cool. It's lovely. But there's another part of this equation. It's kind of implied symbolism. So let's take a look at that end of the spectrum too. Here we have the Tarot Claude Rocher 1754, a lovely Marseille deck that is full of printing errors. Now, implied symbolism can be there explicitly or be there implicitly, and I think both are very interesting and both kind of exist in this deck too. Take the, 7 of Coins. We have some very kind of specific symbolism, but it's there. We have these coins being separated out, this coin being kind of cradled by the foliage in the center, and these two just sticking out on top. This is not a symbol of an hourglass or a hawk, fishing or something, whatever hawks do. See, not an animal guy. But that's symbolic, like the idea that these four are nice and stable and they all have their own space. This coin is taking up too much space and it's actually keeping other things out with these spikes. So it's ostracizing these two coins on top. That is some implicit or implied symbolism at its finest. That is like one thing that Marseille decks really, really do well. But because of the printing errors, there's all these other cool things that happen. So here we see the Five of Wands, and behind it, there's the shadow of another card. That was not supposed to be there. That is not the deck creator saying, I want to do this cool thing with, shadows behind. That's just them not having the technology or the time maybe to like clean the plates properly as they're printing this thing. But we take the Five of Wands, we have this kind of echo of the other card in the back. Maybe it is the echoes of violence and how they can constantly haunt us. Or take the Eight of Wands? Here we have some foliage kind of ejecting off of the side here. A card full of potential and power and speed and movement. This is exhaust blowing off the side. You could be moving super fast. You could be producing a lot of energy, but what kind of blow off does that have? What kind of effect does that have on your environment around you? Or the Ten of Swords. Here in the middle of the Ten of Swords, we have a leaf that's been cut off and is falling. This is, a definitive ending to something. It is killing something. It is, removing the life out of a situation, out of your ego, out of an idea, whatever it might be. And here we can see that explicitly in the center, but not intentionally. I think this is a fantastic example of a deck that has all sorts of symbolism that the deck author didn't even know about. Already back on our spreadsheet, we have meaningful symbolism, and I'm going to weight this at 0.6 as well. It's important. It's not the most important thing to me because, again, you can read tarot cards as is, but it definitely is important. And that is our four main categories. Now, below that, we have positive and negative X factor because there's going to be things that are important to a deck that just don't fit into these categories, and they're not going to be worth a ton of points. They're just going to kind of tip the scales a little bit in both ways. Positive X factor, for example, a dope box like the Keymaster Tarot. Look at this thing. That is not a tarot box. That's a piece of art. That is, not going to make or break a tarot deck to me, but that's a positive X factor. Meanwhile, negative X factor, we have the True Black Tarot. This is a masterpiece, a capital M masterpiece, but the cardstock is so thick and so kind of luxurious that it is almost impossible to shuffle, and I hate using it. So talk about a deck that is like perfect on all accounts except for the fact that I don't want to touch it. That is a negative X factor. And there we have it. We have our scorecard. We have our spreadsheet all filled out. I've worked in some secret formulas behind the scenes to harshly critique our decks, which we love dearly, and rate them from perfect, fantastic, strong, good, average, or weak. So depending on how many points they get against the percentage of total points, it'll be rated on one of those things. And the text is going to pop up here on the bottom. And it's going to be color-coded, and it's going to be beautiful. And we're all going to have a really great time. And I'm loving it. Which brings us back to the entire reason I decided to do this. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? The Drowning World. What the heck? The Drowning World. Let's take it step by step through our scorecard and see where it comes out. Consistency of execution, 5. The images are beautiful and crisp. It's always top down over water. There is a lot of variety in there. There's people, there's humans, but the actual intention behind the deck, I think, is perfectly captured from card to card. So we're going to go 5. And that category is weighted the highest, so that's not worth nothing. Exciting or varied images. Now for this one, I'm going to give it a 3. There are some images that are really exciting and really cool, and some like this one where there's just sort of plants on the outside and there's some fish there, but I don't know, it's not exactly igniting my, soul. But then there's ones like this where there's woven reeds and the pips are really beautifully composed and they really trigger my brain and get me excited. So it's not like it's not there, but I'd say it's about average. It does it about a 3 out of 5. Uniqueness of system. This one, I'm going to give a 4. It's really, really different from other decks that I have, but it does a little bit tread into Marseille territory, and it's right there on the box. It even says a Marseille-style tarot deck. Now, it's decently different than Marseille, but I think just having plain pips on a background feels Marseille enough to me to not be 100% a unique system. And meaningful symbolism. For meaningful symbolism, I'm going to give this a 3. I think that there are cool things in here that are happening, that are symbolic, and there's a lot of stuff that just seems like those are flowers. And, you know, I don't know enough about flowers to know if these were all chosen super intentionally or not. With the volume of foliage that's here, I can't believe that everything was picked super symbolically. But at least to me, to this reader, nah, it feels about average again. Look at that card. That's an exciting varied image right there. So I'm gonna give it a 3. For positive or negative X factor, not really. I think it's got, you know, really unique characteristics to it. It's really exciting in some ways, but nah, it's nothing so much so that it's gonna pull me one direction or another. And that leaves us with good at the bottom. And, you know, it's color-coded yellow, just like the stars at 3, because good is right in the middle. And that's exactly where I feel like this deck lives. It is just right in the middle. And I like it because it's so unique and cool and different. But I don't like it because sometimes it's boring and there's just a bunch of zucchinis on a card. So I don't know, I'm still having a tough time with it. Let's take a look at this deck in comparison to the rest of the collection. All right, here is most of my collection, all judged side by side. We can see various rankings and ratings across the board. I'm thankful to say a lot of 5s, which makes me very happy. And then down here in the bottom left, the Drowning World, the only deck on the list that is good. Everything else is strong, fantastic, or perfect. And again, that's not a instant get rid of it, but that tells me that this might be the weakest deck in the collection. It doesn't inspire magic in the same way that some of the other decks do, which is bananas to me because it feels like it should. And herein lies kind of the thing. Do you keep a deck because it is so intriguing and curious to you that you want to keep using it? Or do you call the deck because it's not good enough? And every time you reach for it, it's going to be cool and unique for a little bit, kind of like a sugar high, but then crash into mediocrity afterwards, and you ultimately feel a little bit uninspired, you know, after using that deck. It's a really fine line to cross, because getting rid of a deck, you know, it's not impossible to get a tarot deck back, but you got to buy it again, and I already have it. What I have found in the past is that decks that I pick up and I feel hesitant to pick them up, it's time for them to go. If I'm looking at a tarot deck and I'm not getting positive feelings from it, then it's a thing in my house that's making me feel negative. And I don't really like that. I don't know if I'm there with the Drowning World or not. Honestly, I'm going to give it a little bit more time, but I think this was a helpful exercise. And hopefully it was interesting to see how I break down what's a good deck and a bad deck and where things fall in my collection. Cool. With that, I so hope you all enjoyed. If you have your own categories for what you like or don't like about tarot decks, I would really love to hear it down below, because I think those kind of details are so exciting when picking apart someone's collection and seeing what they like and what they don't like. All right, I'll see y'all next time. Hopefully I've made a decision. I'm going to do a deck collection video at some point here, and we'll see if the Drowning World makes it in. Who knows? But until next time, bye-bye!